Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Pakistan's National Assembly has unanimously adopted a resolution condemning blasphemous caricatures published in France. The resolution called on the international community to come up with a framework for the safety of Muslims. Earlier, Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan urged his nation to boycott French goods. This comes amid worldwide protests over French President Emmanuel Macron's derogatory remarks against Islam. In Syria, more than 50 rebel fighters have reportedly been killed and many others wounded in a Russian airstrike in Idlib. The air raid targeted a training camp for Falak al-Sham, one of the country's largest opposition groups. A spokesperson for the group has confirmed the killing of several camp leaders in the attack. In Iraq, clashes have broken out between police and anti-government protesters in the capital city of Baghdad. Police fired tear gas to disperse crowds as some protesters hurled rocks at them. This comes a day after a rally marked the first anniversary of the start of nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Azerbaijan says it has liberated 11 more villages in Zangilan and Jebriel regions from the Armenian occupation. Earlier, Azerbaijan and Armenia accused each other of violating a US-brokered humanitarian truce. More than 1,000 people have been killed in fighting over the Nagorno-Karabakh region since September 27. The global number of coronavirus infections has topped 43 million with over 1.15 million deaths. India's caseload has crossed 7.9 million after more than 45,000 people have been tested positive in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 3 lives overnight, with the tally reaching 6,739. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now the news in detail. Pakistan's National Assembly has unanimously adopted a resolution condemning blasphemous caricatures published in France. The resolution was tabled by Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. It called on the international community to come up with a framework for the safety of Muslims. Earlier, the Foreign Office summoned the French envoy to voice anger over the rising Islamophobia in France. This comes amid worldwide protests over French President Emmanuel Macron's derogatory remarks against Islam. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called for a boycott of French goods. In a televised speech, he said the French president is inciting attacks on Muslims in Europe. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said insulting Muslims is an abuse of free speech. The 57-nation Organization of Islamic Cooperation also condemned the French government's actions against Muslims. The resurgence of blasphemous cartoons in France has ignited Muslims to protest worldwide. The protests are being held after the caricatures were also projected on some buildings in France. More details in this report.
Protests have erupted around the globe as publications of blasphemous caricatures in France hurt the sentiments of Muslims worldwide. Protests have been seen in Libya, Syria, Palestine, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Protesters in Dhaka held up cartoons of French President Emmanuel Macron and said he needs mental treatment.
The French president needs mental treatment. He is not only made himself the enemy of Islam, but all of peace-loving people.
Earlier, Macron declared a war on Islamist separatism and refused to give up on the blasphemous cartoons. Several Arab trade associations announced a boycott of French products in response to Macron's statement. French products have also been removed from some shops in Kuwait, Jordan, and Qatar.
This is the least we can do in support of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. They, the French people, have to respect our religion and principles. They have freedom of speech in this regard, and we also have freedom of speech. They expressed by cartoons, and we will express in economy. Eventually, we will see who is stronger.
Meanwhile, French Foreign Ministry has urged Middle Eastern countries to end calls for a boycott of its goods.
Pakistan says it will continue playing a role for peace and stability in Afghanistan. Prime Minister Imran Khan said this while addressing the Pakistan-Afghanistan Trade and Investment Forum 2020 in Islamabad. Khan said peace in Afghanistan is important for trade and economic activities in the region. The Prime Minister asserted that Islamabad will maintain strong ties with Kabul no matter who is in power. He warned that India could use Afghan land to try to destabilize Pakistan. At the event, Walisi Jirga Speaker Mir Rahman Rahmani said Kabul values Islamabad's contributions to Afghan peace. He called for enhancing parliamentary contacts between the two countries. The U.S. says it has killed 5 Taliban fighters in an airstrike in the Nurk region of Afghanistan's central Wardak province. The spokesperson for U.S. forces in Afghanistan said the raid was carried out in defense of Afghan government forces. Colonel Sunny Legit said the airstrike was in accordance with the U.S. Taliban Doha agreement. Legit also rejected the allegations of Afghan civilian killings in the raid. Turkey's Defense Minister Hulusi Akar has lauded Pakistan's positive role for the regional peace and stability. In a meeting with Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi, Akar commended sacrifices made by the Pakistan Army in battling the scourge of terrorism. The two leaders exchanged views on issues of mutual interest, including regional security. General Bajwa said the two sides share a great history of friendly relations, which is being transformed into enduring partnership. In Syria, more than 50 rebel fighters have reportedly been killed and many others wounded in a Russian airstrike in Idlib. The air raid targeted a training camp for Falak al-Sham, one of the country's largest opposition groups. A spokesperson for the group has confirmed the killing of several camp leaders in the attack. The Syrian Observatory put the number of dead at 78. The war monitor the death toll could rise further as some of the wounded are in a critical condition. This is the deadliest attack since Russia and Turkey reached a ceasefire in Idlib in March. In Iraq, clashes have broken out between police and anti-government protesters in the capital city of Baghdad. Police fired tear gas to disperse crowds and some protesters hurled rocks at them. Protesters are demanding an overhaul of the country's political system in a repeat of last year's demonstrations. Rallies were also held in Iraq's southern towns and cities. This comes a day after a rally marked the first anniversary of the start of nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Around 600 people have been killed since a wave of popular unrest began on the 1st of October last year. In Yemen, the Saudi-led coalition says it has destroyed another explosive-laden drone launched by the Houthis. State media said the drone was deliberately launched towards civilian territories in Saudi Arabia. This is the second such incident in 24 hours. Yesterday, the coalition said it intercepted a Houthi drone aimed at the kingdom. Azerbaijan says it has liberated 11 more villages in Zangilan and Jabril regions from the Armenian occupation. Azerbaijan and Armenia have accused each other of violating the latest humanitarian truce. This comes after the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Begin announced a ceasefire following a meeting with the foreign ministers of both countries. More details in this report.
Azerbaijan claims Armenian forces have violated a U.S.-brokered humanitarian truce. The Azeri Defense Ministry says Armenian forces shelled villages in the Terter and Lachen regions. However, authorities in the Nagorno-Karabakh have accused Azeri forces of launching a missile attack. Earlier, a joint statement by the United States, Armenia, and Azerbaijan said the ceasefire came into effect this morning. In a tweet, U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated both Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders. Meanwhile, the OSCE Minsk Group said its co-chairs and foreign ministers will meet again on October 29th to discuss the issue. It said the talks will focus on starting talks for a comprehensive solution to the conflict. Earlier, Azerbaijan said it liberated several villages of the Zangilan, Jabrail, and Baldi regions from the Armenian occupation. More than 1,000 people have been killed in the clashes that erupted on the 27th of September.
China says it will impose sanctions on top U.S. defense firms, including Boeing and Lockheed Martin, for supplying weapons to Taiwan. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said China took the decision to safeguard its national interest and sovereignty. He asked Washington to abide by its commitment to the One China policy and terminate the military contact with Taiwan.
China once again urges the United States to abide by its commitment to the One China principle and the rules of the three joint communiques and terminate arms sales and military contact with Taiwan. China will continue to take necessary measures to safeguard its sovereignty and security interests.
Japan and the U.S. have begun air, sea and land exercises, a major show of force in the region. The keen started exercise around Japan as the first big drill since Yoshihide Suga became Prime Minister last month. Suga has vowed to continue the military build-up aimed at countering China. The exercises involve dozens of warships, hundreds of aircrafts and 46,000 soldiers from Japan and the U.S. Japan's top military commander, General Koji Yamazaki, said cyber and electronic warfare training was also introduced. He said the security situation around Japan has become increasingly severe, but China has said its intentions in the region are entirely peaceful. Russia has rejected U.S. Democratic nominee Joe Biden's statement that Moscow is the biggest threat to U.S. national security. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Biden's remarks encouraged hatred. This comes just over a week before Biden faces Donald Trump in the November 3rd U.S. presidential election. Moscow has also rejected accusations by U.S. intelligence agencies that Russia is trying to meddle in the election. In the United States, pre-election voting for the November presidential election has surpassed all early ballots cast in 2016. More than 58.7 million Americans have voted so far, compared with around 58.3 million 4 years ago. Pre-election day voting is skyrocketing nationwide amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. With 9 days to go in the election, early voting locations have opened in the states of Florida and Texas. Democrats continue to dominate the initial balloting, but Republicans are aggressively narrowing the gap. In Florida, Democrats have outvoted Republicans by a 596,000 margin by mail. With 150 million total votes expected, analysts predict the highest possible turnout in a U.S. presidential election since 1908. And in Belarus, thousands of protesters took to the streets to ramp up pressure on President Alexander Lukashenko in a nationwide strike. Strikes broke out after President Lukashenko ignored the opposition's midnight deadline for him to step down. Earlier, opposition parties had threatened to launch a national strike if he refused to resign. Police used force and detained over 500 protesters in different parts of the country, while opposition leader Sviatlana urged Belarusians to block roads and shut down workplaces. Belarus has been rocked by mass protests since August's controversial presidential election. The global number of coronavirus infections has topped 43 million with over 1.15 million deaths. In India, the cases tally has crossed 7.9 million after more than 45,000 people have been tested positive in the past 24 hours. More details in this report.
Even after months of COVID-19, the world is still struggling to find a way to contain the virus as it continues to relapse. Europe has reported the highest daily surge in cases for the third consecutive day. Hospital admissions and deaths continue to overwhelm the region. France continues to shatter grim record of highest daily cases. Spain has imposed a national emergency and nighttime curfew amid an aggressive outbreak in the country.
que vivimos es extrema.
To inform you that the government held an extraordinary cabinet meeting that has decreed a state of emergency throughout the country. We are living in an extreme situation. It is in fact the most serious health emergency experienced by Spain since the approval of our constitution in 1978 and also in the last half century.
The number of Russians exposed to the virus has surpassed 1.5 million as the death toll rises over 25,000. The virus-ravaged India is now bracing for another spike in cases due to the mass gathering in the ongoing festive season.
Earlier, people were cautious regarding COVID-19, but now they are getting more careless every day. However, administration is still trying to be strict to no avail. Earlier, the infections in Aligarh were rising at 100 to 150 every day, which is now coming down. But people have definitely become very careless.
Meanwhile, China has reported 137 asymptomatic COVID-19 cases, which is the highest in nearly 7 months.
The new coronavirus has claimed 3 more lives in Pakistan overnight, raising the death toll to 6,739. The health ministry says 707 people tested positive for the disease in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 10,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 328,000 countrywide cases, more than 311,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 143,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 102,000 cases. In the capital Islamabad, nearly 19,000 have been infected so far. South Korea is urging citizens to get influenza shots despite 48 deaths following vaccination this month. Authorities say they found no direct link between the deaths and the flu shots. Public anxiety over the safety of flu vaccine has surged after the fatalities last month. About 5 million doses had to be disposed of after not being stored of recommended temperatures. Last year, more than 1,500 elderly people died within 7 days of vaccination, but the government said the deaths were not linked to the shots. Meanwhile, Singapore became one of the first nations to call a temporary halt to the use of 2 influenza vaccines as a precaution. And now it's time to take a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. And moving on to Nigeria has imposed curfew in 4 more states as mass protests against police brutality turned violent. 13 states are currently under restrictions. Kaduna State Governor Nasir Ahmed Al-Rufai says the 24-hour curfew has been declared to ban protests. The Deputy Governor of Taraba said the state curfew follows the incident of good loots of state storehouses. 2 weeks ago, mass demonstrations against police brutality were triggered by the killing of a young man by police. Chileans have voted overwhelmingly for the country's constitution to redraft it, with 90% of the votes counted. 78% of the people said yes to a fresh charter. President Sebastián Piñera has accepted the results and praised the peaceful vote. Majority voted for the new constitution to be drafted by a convention comprising citizens, which will be elected in April. The referendum was prompted by mass protests began in Chile a year ago, demanding to fix deep inequalities in society. The old constitution was drafted in 1980 during the Augusto Pinochet military dictatorship. Greece says it is explaining to expand security relations with the United States. In a parliamentary address, Foreign Minister Nikos Dadias said Athens might sign a new agreement with Washington. Nikos Dadias said Greece will immediately begin a dialogue on the expansion of the Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement. Dadias said the strengthening of U.S. and Greek relations is evident through recent meetings with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The statement comes as Athens looks for support from allies amid escalating tensions with Ankara in the eastern Mediterranean. U.S. Secretary of State of Mike Pompeo has landed in India, the first leg of a 5-day Asian trip. The tour is aimed at strengthening strategic ties with the regional countries. Pompeo arrived in the capital city of New Delhi along with the U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper. The Indian Foreign Ministry said Pompeo will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Foreign Minister Jaishankar. He will later travel to Sri Lanka and Maldives and conclude his trip in Indonesia on October 30th. After a 10-hour standoff, British forces have freed 22 crew members by thwarting a suspected hijacking of an oil tanker off the Isle of Wight. In a tweet, England's Ministry of Defence says 7 suspected hijackers have been arrested. It said the country's special forces descended from military helicopters onto the vessel. The ministry said the Liberian registered name Andromeda ship requested the military assistance. Support was called after onboard stowaways believed to be Nigerians seeking asylum in the UK became violent. In the Philippines, 12 fishermen are missing after a strong typhoon lashed the southern part of Luzon Island overnight. The Office of Civil Defense says at least 25,000 people have been displaced. Authorities say 20,000 people are taking shelter in evacuation centers. They say the fast-moving typhoon made landfall, flooding rural villages, ripping off roofs, toppling trees and power lines. More than 1,800 cargo truck drivers, workers and passengers are stranded in the ports. The storm packed gusts up to 150 kilometers per hour. Officials say MOLAVE will start blowing out of the country into the South China Sea today. It will head towards Vietnam on Tuesday. More news coming up after the short break. Stay tuned. And now moving on, Italian tenor Andrea Bocelli performed on the steps of Sicily's Noto Cathedral. The show was organized in line with COVID-19 regulations. More in this report.
Andrea Bocelli is one of the world's most famous opera singers, who has sold over 90 million records worldwide, and he looked in good spirits as he performed on the steps of Sicily's Noto Cathedral. The performance aimed to launch a message of strength and union among the 7 UNESCO sites in Sicily.
I already came here many years ago. I love Sicily because it is a land that gave birth to many big musicians. For me, it means a lot to sing here.
The tenor was accompanied by the orchestra and the choir of the Theatre Massimo Bellini of Catania, directed by Alberto Bartolini.
In Finland, nature's most spectacular light show, the Aurora Borealis, lit up the sky above Lapland region, north of the Arctic Circle. Large swaths of the green with streaks of white and purple shone through a layer of cloud cover over the village of Utsujoki. The northern lights are the result of collisions between the Earth's gaseous particles and matter released by the sun's atmosphere. The northern lights are visible on roughly 200 nights a year in the area. A 9-day fashion week is underway in Beijing's art zone following the easing of coronavirus restrictions. More details in this report.
While international fashion weeks have gone fully digital with few physical runways due to COVID-19, China's domestic fashion weeks are blooming with extravagant offline ceremonies. Crowds packed a former industrial warehouse in Beijing as the China Fashion Week got underway, with models strutting maskless on a square runway and guests oblivious of social distancing norms.
Under different lights, the materials look different. You can feel it if you watch the show offline, such as the gloss, or if it is light enough to float in the air. But if watching online, you cannot feel these kind of characteristics.
After the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic hit, the country's fashion industry saw a rebound in August. The recovery made China a lone bright spot in the retail world for global consumers like Louis Vuitton.
The data of this year will look better and better monthly. Like what I've said, in August, the domestic consumption on clothing increased 4.4%. I think in terms of fashion industry in the fourth quarter, winter clothing is the most important. The value of it is more important than that of summer.
The event will hold nearly 100 activities and 2 fashion contests. It expects to attract not only Chinese but also overseas designers from various countries, including the UK and Peru.
Stocks fell sharply as coronavirus infections jumped and negotiations for a fiscal stimulus package before the election came down to the wire. All three major Wall Street indices are trading lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading lower by over 2%, while the S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite also slumped by over 1%. Over in Pakistan, stocks were in the green with the KSE 100 index trading higher by about 1.5%. The index was lifted by cement stocks and an encouraging FATF announcement on Friday. Meanwhile, global oil prices fell on surge in COVID-19 cases, while Libya's fast-growing production also weighed on prices. In the English Premier League football, Leicester City beat Arsenal 1-0 thanks to Jamie Vardy's late close-range header. Arsenal failed to score in the first half hour, racking up 10 shots and 6 corners. The striker's 11th Premier League goal against Arsenal gave his side their first win to Arsenal since 1973. This has lifted Leicester City to 4th position with 12 points, with Arsenal in 10th place after 6 games. And now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.